Sitting before me are all of my lenses. I know I have a lot of people who follow me here on YouTube who are interested in filmmaking and photography, so today I'm gonna be talking about these bad boys and what kind of situations I might use them in to hopefully give you an idea of where to begin in capturing something beautiful. Let's talk about lenses. So my little group of lenses range from short and fast to slow and deep. Before we dive in, something you must understand is that I got my first DSLR in 2010. 10 years ago. It has taken me 10 years to amass this library of lenses, so don't feel like you need to do this overnight. Don't feel like you need to do this at all. Nobody really needs this amount of lenses. You can pretty much do everything you need to do with just a couple. I know a lot of people who sell their lenses to buy new ones. I've never personally wanted to do that because I get really attached to things and really sentimental, like, oh, I could never sell my Canon 16 to 35. We shot the entirety of the Forever train on this. I'm a Class A hoarder. I'm trying not to be. I have taken the liberty of grouping my lenses into categories to explain them to you best. Please allow me to introduce you to
the Super Wide Brothers. Great for giving you that fantastical, distorted, warped look to your film. The All-Rounders. You'll always want at least one of these in your utility belt. The Prime Thick Dudes. Their focal length might not change, but the way you compose your shots will. The Long One stands still, sees far and further than that. A surprise haiku. The Misfits. They're strange and could fit into a few of these categories, and also none at the same time. For the purposes of demonstrating each lens, I set up a table with my little pink peach guy as the subject, and some fairy lights to compare the bokeh. I've made sure the lighting conditions are controlled so each lens has the same amount of light to work with. I'll be shooting on a Sony a7S Mark II using the Metabones adapter for non-Sony lenses, and the camera is roughly 55 centimeters away from the peach guy, except for when I show you the telephoto lens later. I had to go a bit further back for that.
With all that said, let's dive in. The Tokina 11 to 16 2.8 and the Sigma 10 to 20 3.5. Stick one of these on your crop sensor DSLR or your mirrorless camera, whack it in the corner of the room, and watch as the world around you becomes enormous. These two guys are very similar, the third brother being the Canon 10 to 22 3.5 to 4.5. I do not own that lens, I'm not a huge fan of variable apertures, we'll get to that later. The Tokina got me through thick and thin in my early filmmaking adventures. When I was at university, I had this and a 50mm lens. No in between. Both in combination with the full frame Canon 5D Mark II made for some pretty drastic limitations that required me to think about some wildly creative solutions to go around them. Would I strongly recommend having something in between the ranges of 16 and 50? Yes. But we made PJ Tiny Planet Explorer using only these two lenses and won an award for it. So you don't have to have all the range. Sometimes you gotta get creative with what you got. I always really liked wide-angle lenses for my style of filmmaking. I like to tell weird and surreal stories that take place in fantastical worlds. What better way of presenting that than practically distorting the world in camera using a lens that does just that? Now, I don't use the Tokina for wide-angle stuff anymore, I use the Sigma lens. So why might I choose the Sigma over the Tokina? Well, the Tokina's broken, so that's the main reason. It doesn't focus anymore at all. If you use the Tokina on a full frame camera and you dip below 15mm, you're gonna get this major wild vignetting. But I don't know, maybe you want that. Maybe you're doing a film that takes place in a black hole. Also, fun fact, I'm not actually tall. I just use wide angle lenses. I don't need to explain to you why these are called the All-Rounders, but I'm going to anyway. It's because all of them are round. Also because they're all round good boys. One of these lenses is clearly being bullied by the others. Can you guess which one? The 18 to 55 3.5 to 5.6 kit lens that came with the 550D. This lens, it's got image stabilization. What do you want me to say? This lens, it gets the job done for sure. And I don't think I actually replaced it until about 4 years after I started using it. So it is totally an acceptable lens to get making things with, if not just a bit unexciting. So when I did finally get tired of the constantly shifting aperture and the plasticky feel of it, I got this, my first and only red ring lens, the Canon 16 to 35 2.8. This lens is a beast. I've dropped it, kicked it, shouted at it. It does not break easily. Can't say it doesn't break at all. It doesn't break easily. It's definitely one of my favorites. Like I said, we shot all of the Forever Train on this. We shot a lot of things all on this. It doesn't quite get the same length as the kit lens, but there are alternatives that do. And to be honest, I've never really been that conscious about focal length. I've always just thought, well, we'll just move closer to the subject then. The thing that always sparks my interest is the aperture. Particularly a low and fixed aperture is exciting to me. The aperture is the opening in the lens that allows light to pass through and into the camera. The super basics of it are this. The lower your f-stop, the more light enters your camera. Therefore, you get a more shallow depth of field. So if you're shooting in an environment that doesn't have a lot of light, like a dimly lit street at night, you might want to consider a lens that has a lower aperture. The perfect comparison is this Sony equivalent. Again, 16-35 and a fixed aperture, but this time, it's 4. It is sensible to film at an f-stop of 4. I think I'm filming at 4 right now because it's generally easier to keep things in focus nice and sharp. Does that mean you shouldn't film at a lower aperture? Hell no. I shoot at 2.8, I shoot at 2. Hell, sometimes I even shoot at 1.4. But don't tell my mum I said that, okay? So why might I choose the Canon over the Sony? Well, if I'm shooting on a Canon camera, then it's a no-brainer. The Sony will just physically not fit. Otherwise, the lower aperture might get you out of an awkward situation where you're filming in low light conditions. And if you don't need to shoot at 2.8, you can just bump it up. I like having the option. However, if you're shooting on a Sony camera and autofocus is important to you, then even with a Metabones adapter, a Canon lens like this is just not gonna work to the best of its ability. So what about this bozo? The Tamron 28-75 2.8. Very curious stats indeed. It doesn't go nearly as wide as the other all-rounders, but it does go much longer. It's a little awkward that the widest you can go is 28, but otherwise it's a really solid lens and it does a really good job. And do not be fooled that the brand is not Canon or Sony. Tamron make really good lenses for the price as well. This one still really packs a punch and looks beautiful doing it. Chef kisses all around. Just look at this little collection of stubby thick dudes. Aren't they beautiful? Let's start at the beginning. The cheapest prime lens you can get. Hell, probably the cheapest lens you can get. Weighing in at just under 100 pounds cash. The 50mm 1.8. The granddad. The plastic fantastic. Or as I like to call it, the plastic piece of shit. That was a joke. That was, I swear, that was just, I jest, I swear. People feel very strongly either one way or another about this lens, so I'm staying neutral. I like it. It's fine, but I see its flaws and I'm not blinded by the price tag. It totally gets the job done and looks great doing it. But if you drop it from any height, and I do mean any height, as a joke, you're gonna fork out for another one of these, and then another when you drop it again, and then another when you drop it again. So if you're super clumsy like me, what do? You can consider the evolved form of the 1.8, the 1.4, the nifty 50 with an f-stop just lower than the 1.8. The build quality, the weight, the focus ring is so much smoother. 3 lovely factors that makes it 3 times more expensive than the 1.8. So it definitely feels like a nice upgrade if you've got your money's worth from the 1.8. And I wouldn't say skip the 1.8, I would just say be very careful. I will say this though, my 1.4 broke on me for no reason whatsoever. I didn't drop it, I didn't kick it, the focus ring just stopped working. Oh, what's that? I shouldn't be making that sound. See, it's broken. It shouldn't be rattling. I did buy another one though, because when you go 1.4, you can't go back. You can't go back. Here's the Sony equivalent, 50mm 1.8. Same stats, but definitely feels a little more sturdy than the 1.8. The focus ring is as smooth as butter. But that's just about it. Whack it on a Sony camera, you'll have a great time. Here's a neat little prime lens. The Canon 35mm f2. This is by no means a necessary lens for your collection, but eventually down the line, you might find a use for it. I personally like to take this lens out with me when I want something wider than the 50mm, with still a relatively fast aperture, but is super lightweight. This definitely ticks those boxes. All my life, I've never really been interested in telephoto lenses. I always would brush it off as something that I would never have a use for because I'm not primarily a photographer who takes pictures of herons on a lake. Well, last year I actually did take a picture of a heron on a lake whilst using this lens, and it was really cool. This is the Tamron 75-300 with a variable aperture of 4 to 5.6. To explain variable apertures, which I said earlier I'm not a huge fan of, it means when you zoom in, the aperture automatically changes. That's actually totally fine for a lens like this. When you're shooting at a focal length of 300, you don't want an aperture of 1.4. You'll never get anything in focus. I bought this to experiment with because I found it super cheap in a shop for like 80 quid or something. And I've got a surprising amount of use out of it for videos on YouTube and also travel stuff. I went to Canada last year and I made a video about it. It's on my channel if you want to see it. And this lens played a huge role in that video, especially when we went to Algonquin. Getting all those lovely shots of herons and chipmunks. And I know you're thinking, yeah, PJ, no shit, a telephoto lens is good for taking pictures of wildlife. It just took me a long time to try it. It also has really good macro functionality. Whack it to 300, stick on macro mode, capture those tiny, tiny details. Knowing what kind of doors this opened for me creatively, I wish I'd got one sooner. I don't think I'm ever going to invest in a more expensive telephoto lens because this is fine. This does everything I need it to do, really. It's not perfect, sure, but nothing is. These bozos were difficult to place because they're not massively versatile, but they're really unique. Ironically, these two, the misfits, are my favorite lenses. I don't know what that says about me, but let's talk about this beauty first. The Sigma 20mm 1.4. I love it so much I bought it twice. Why'd I buy it twice? Well, funny story actually. My camera slipped out of my hands and landed lens first. Oh wait. It's not a funny story, but it does say something about the quality of the glass, because it didn't shatter, it broke in other ways and is now unusable. And I did drop it onto concrete as well. Just, ooh, and the bounce, it bounced. And I swore quite loudly. The lady next to me laughed for some reason. It was protected by this inbuilt lens hood, which you can't take off, but then you wouldn't want to. Just look at how beautifully bulbous the glass is. If this lens existed when I was making experimental films back in uni, I would have snapped this up so fast and just dealt with the limitations of it only being 20mm. And did I mention the aperture was 1.4? The widest and fastest lens I have. It definitely fell to the ground fast, that's for sure. I really, really love how unique this lens is. It is very rare to come by a lens that is such wide angle and such a low aperture, especially at an affordable price. So what's the catch? Well, there is no catch. Oh, other than it weighs like 1,000,000 pounds. I have to be honest, I hate how heavy this lens is. I've gone on trips like to Japan where I've limited myself to using only this lens and like a 50mm. And the weight, oh, it sucks. It really sucks. It's heavier than the camera itself. But I just put up with it because a wide angle lens with a super shallow depth of field, you get some really interesting results. And then one day I thought, I'm using this lens so much for like everything that I'm doing. Why don't I invest in a lens that's got similar stats, but is lighter? And so that brings us on to our final lens for today and my favorite lens in my entire collection, the Sony 24mm 1.4. And so what do you get for the 4mm trade-off? Well, it's super light. It's amazing. This is now the default lens that sits on my camera. If I'm going out, if I'm filming around the house, if I'm streaming, this is the one. I still mix and match with other lenses, of course, but this is my baby. Which lens is right for you? Yes, you watching this video right now. Usually when people ask me about filmmaking and what kind of kit you need, I always say it doesn't really matter about the equipment, it's what you put in front of the camera, which I still totally stand by, but eventually you're gonna wanna start upgrading your gear and investing in things that make your life easier in other departments. And you're most likely watching this video because you wanna learn about and most likely use lenses, so let me recommend you some lenses. If you're early on in your filmmaking adventures, assuming you have a Canon camera with only the kit lens, then this is absolutely 100% the first lens you should buy. The 50mm 1.8. It's just less than £100 on Amazon. Just try not to drop it. You're genuinely going to be very amazed at the kind of results you can get with this, especially if you've only been using the kit lens. If you want to get experimental and want to start doing some wide angle funky stuff, Sigma 10 to 20mm 3.5 will be your best friend. There's something so satisfying about sticking a wide angle lens on your camera and seeing your room grow. You can do some super creative things with a wide angle lens, so definitely check it out. And if you're looking for something reliable to replace your kit lens with, then you're going to want to look at the Tamron 17 to 50mm 2.8, which I used to have, but I lost it. I think when I was moving out of uni, I must have misplaced it or something, but it's gone. That lens is gone. If you're using a full frame camera, however, this one is probably going to be more useful too. The Tamron 28 to 75 2.8. And just because some of these lenses aren't branded Canon or Sony, that doesn't make them bad at all. I think the more particular problems with lenses, such as vignetting and chromatic aberration and warping and sharpness, those kind of things start to become more relevant when you're doing work more professionally. I don't really pay attention to that stuff, but then my whole style is a little bit more handcrafted, homemade anyway, so a little bit of chromatic aberration doesn't really bother me. So if you're just learning the craft and building your skills, then these lenses, they're gonna do you just great. Do remember as well about what I said about limitations. If you wanna take the plunge and focus on using one specific lens, then there's nothing stopping you. You just might need to adapt certain things you're doing to the kit you have. It's not a problem. If you do have any general questions about lenses and cameras, then please put them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them as best I can. Also, there are no doubt gonna be some much smarter people than me in the comments below, so those people also feel free to help answer questions. Let's just have a big old camera chat. I remember how limiting knowledge on DSLRs was back in 2010. They were becoming the brand new thing for amateur filmmaking, and everything that I was doing was all guesswork. So if I can pass on any of the knowledge or the things I've learned to you guys, then I want to. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please do give it a thumbs up if you found it helpful in any way. And also please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you know when I upload a video. You'll get a little text saying, yo, your best friend PJ's uploaded a video. Maybe you want to watch it? Maybe? Cool. Stay around, everybody, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.
Listen up, listen up, listen up, listen up.
Now everybody listen up, listen up, listen up.
Well, guess what? Now it's my turn. So you just shut up and pay attention.
Everybody just listen.